afternoon and welcome to the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Week. My name is Kitty Sabaslai. I am the producer and host of today's discussion, and I would like to just say the few words before we get started. If this is your first session as part of the conference, welcome. We are really happy that you could make it here live with us virtually. And if you have been listening into the other sessions that we have had earlier today, then welcome back. We hope that the events that we have laid out for the rest of the afternoon and for the rest of the week will bring you benefits, will bring you understanding, will create a forum to ask your questions and start a discussion amongst many stakeholders in the sector of the extractives. And which brings me to our esteemed presenter for today, who will talk about Trinidad and Tobago using EITI data to inform public policy and dialogue. Mr. Sherwin Long, who is the National Coordinator for Trinidad and Tobago Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. He is the Secretary. And the presentation and the discussion we have for you today is really focusing on Trinidad and Tobago and what they have seen. They have seen their fair share of ups and downs as it has battled a natural resource curse over the years. And with the abundance of oil and natural gas, it has managed to become one of the Western Hemisphere's largest natural gas processors. It is also one of the wealthiest countries in the Caribbean. Fortune, however, does come at a price that has challenged economics, politics, transparency, and environment and society. Since 2011, Trinidad and Tobago EITI has been playing an active role in supporting transparency and reaching out to stakeholders so that they become better informed about the sector and the benefits of understanding what the facts, data, and information mean to day-to-day lives. So with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Sherwin Long and give this over to him, who will start the presentation for today's discussion.
Thanks a lot for that introduction. Kitty. It's really a pleasure for me to be here at the Guyana Extractives Industry Transparency Week. It's always good to liaise with our peers in Guyana and across the region. My presentation today, I will focus on how do you use EITI data to inform public policy and dialogue. So my presentation, I will just give you a brief introduction into the TC-EITI. Highlight a few of the EITI data insights, as well as highlight some future considerations and key takeaways from this session. So, starting off, who is the TT-EITI? Of course, we are the local leg of our international initiative. It's a global initiative that promotes open and accountable management of a country's natural resources. Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname in the CARICOM region participate in the initiative. We've been participating in the initiative for over a decade. The government of Trinidad and Tobago made a commitment to support the EITI and remove any barriers to the work that we do. So you may ask yourselves, what is some of the work that we do? So to preface that, I will say that all of the work that we perform is based on collective governance. When I say collective governance, I mean that civil society, extractive sector companies, as well as government institutions work together in this initiative. It's part and parcel of the initiative, meaning that each stakeholder group must take part in the initiative and they must have equal footing, they must have equal voice in the initiative. So it's a curious coalition, as people describe it, where groups with competing interests sit together around the table to find mutually beneficial ways to manage the sector and to advance EITI implementation. So what do we do as part of this? Again, data dialogue. We provide a lot of data that it's independently verified. It's quality data, and we hope that it's used by all stakeholders in the right way, you know, where you have data-driven dialogue, data-driven debate around issues. The best way to describe what we do as well is a health check. So we look at government systems and say, okay, in what state of health are these government systems in? We do spot audits. It's a spot audit on revenue collection, data management, as well as audit and assurance systems. And we also provide recommendations in terms of how can you improve if there are any gaps that we spot. So the EITI and what we try to do in Trinidad and Tobago is answer 3 pressing questions. How much do we earn from the extractive sectors? Who do we partner with to develop our resources? And do we get fair value for our resources, right? Again, the data insights will help answer some of these questions. So if you look at how much do we earn, you see certain trends. You can spot certain revenue trends. You can spot the payments by the key extractive sector companies. For instance, on the chart to the left, you can see some of the key players, whether that's BP, Shell, BHP, some of the state enterprises such as NGC and Petrotrin as well, in terms of their contribution over the reporting periods. If you look at the total flows, you can also spot downward trends. This is again based on prices, on production decline. So the data really tells a story in terms of how much do we earn, right? You can take a closer look at specific royalties and taxes to answer questions as well. So for instance, this chart focuses on royalty, and you would see in 2019, there would have been a lot, between 2018 and 2019, there would have been a serious jump in terms of what we would have earned in royalties, and then a decline again in 2018. Well, what happened during that period? In 2018, you had a change to the fiscal regime. So the royalty rate was changed to reflect a 12.5% royalty rate, standard across the board. That led to a large increase in royalties in the corresponding years. And you can also see the decline is linked to prices as well as lower production. So the data that we provide answers some questions in relation to how much do we earn. Now, the next question intuitively is, how do we get fair value? So in Trinidad and Tobago and in other countries in the oil and gas sector, a production sharing contract governs the relationship basically between government and extractive companies. So the way this production sharing contract is that the way it works is that you have a share of profit and a split. So the government will get its split and the companies will get its split. Now, out of that share of profit, the government will pay taxes on behalf of its partners in the contract, right? So you can see, if you look at the green bar, that shows the share of profit. The red bar highlights the taxes that the government will pay on behalf of its partners from the share of profit. And then the orange bar or yellowish bar will be the difference. You can see that there's always, except for in 2019, there's always been a situation where the share of profit is enough to cover the taxes. Now, that is just if you look at the aggregate data. Now, when you start looking at disaggregated data, you can spot some comparisons. You can spot some differences. So, for example, the red figures in this table highlights where for particular blocks, for particular PSCs, it highlights where the share of profit was not enough to cover the tax obligations, right? So you can see, if you look at BHP Block 2C, only in 2 years of the last, say, 7 to 8 years, there was enough to cover the tax obligations. Now, what this highlights to you is that if you go back, you can say, well, in general, it looks as if we are earning more in share of profit than we are paying in taxes. But when you do a deeper dive into the actual blocks, you can see where there's some form of discrepancy. You can highlight, do we get value from these contracts, right? It's important to know that a lot of these contracts are vintage contracts. In the later contracts, you will see a more reasonable split between share of profit and the tax obligations, right? But again, it's important to have this data so you can design your contracts going forward. You can say, okay, what didn't work in a vintage contract that I need to change now to create a better stability, better fiscal stability, better tax stability, better revenue stability. So these are some of the questions that we answer from the data. We also cover the mining/quarrying sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And based on the work that we've done, we've seen that there's a $194 million owed in outstanding royalties. Again, this sector, there's a lot of gaps in terms of how the sector is regulated. So for instance, you only have 8 licensed operators out of roughly 90 operators in the sector. So again, all of this is linked to the outstanding royalties. If you are not licensed, can the government take your rehabilitation or your performance bond? These bonds are part of your license, part of the license regime. So if I say, for instance, I have a mining sector license, I would have to go to my bankers and say, here's a rehabilitation bond and a performance bond. I need this in order to show the Ministry of Energy that, listen, I have money in place in case I don't pay my royalties or in case I don't remediate the area that I've drilled or the area that I would have quarried. Now, this points out that, there's need for change. One, you have outstanding royalties, and 2, you have a system where you don't have licensed operators. Again, we've advocated for the use of technology, whether that is drone technology to quantify stockpiles, whether that is a digital weighbridge system where you have certain mining zones where you have a digital weighbridge that the information feeds back to a central database to say, okay, how much did the trucks from X company shift out of their quarries? You also have, in terms of the licensing process, why don't you have a single electronic window to license operators, make it easier for companies to sign up and be licensed? That can be done through digitization as well of the licensing process. We also are currently advocating for EITI clauses in any of the licenses and contracts, meaning that companies will be mandated to disclose information to us when they sign these contracts. I think it's a good step. It shows that the country is willing to adhere to good governance and transparency from the beginning of its relationship with companies. So I will pause here to take any questions because I see a few questions would have been raised.
Yes, we got some questions. So here's the first one. If the TNT government is paying taxes for foreign oil companies, can the oil companies use their TNT tax receipt to get a foreign tax credit in their home country?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Now, yes, we can say yes. In the Putin and Partners Gas Master Plan study, there was research done to highlight transfer pricing practices and this, again, this is just one bit of research on the topic, but it was estimated that there would have been US $1.5 billion lost annually in taxes based on transfer pricing. Now, one of the discussions going on right now, and it will be the OECD will agree sometime in October, is whether or not you have standardized tax rates and whether or not there is more taxation where countries can earn more tax for production from their countries, where the whole habit of the practice of transfer pricing is curtailed. So I'm not sure if that is one of the questions linked to transfer pricing, but one way to tackle this is through data as well, is through looking at the different contracts, constantly paying attention to the numbers and addressing gaps in your tax, whether it's through tax legislation, whether it's through empowering the tax authorities to do more work in regards to transfer pricing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Long. The next question we have is, before we go on to the second part of your presentation, is for TNT oil industry, who provides the oil production data? It is the oil companies or the TNT government have their own monitoring of oil production data?
All right, this is a question that we would have tackled as well. So what happens is that the companies would provide the production data. The ministry would have, in some cases, there's a pilot sort of digital reporting system. In other cases, companies will submit forms to the ministry. The ministry would then order this information. So for instance, when there's, say, cargo that is being shipped, the bill of lading, the ministry would have inspectors that review the bill of lading and so on to ensure that what is being shipped is the actual on the manifest documents and so on. So there is some inspection. Of course, the Auditor General in Trinidad and Tobago would have raised an issue saying that, listen, while we do have spot audits, while we do sort of independently verify production, that department also needs to be strengthened. So those are some of the recommendations from our own Auditor General as well. But there are some systems in place to independently verify what companies say they produce as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Long. I think we are ready for the second part of the presentation, and we will have some time at the end for some more questions.
Sure. Okay, so just going into some other considerations in terms of the data, this chart here shows what the companies pay to government in training fees for education and research, whether that's scholarships, whether that is technical assistance to purchase equipment, whether that's in research and development for universities. So the data leads to other questions. Of course, this is just one consideration in terms of education and research, but we also highlight information related to environmental payments. These figures here are from the Green Fund levy. It's basically a tax that companies must pay. So if you look in the fund value, as of 2019, there was 6.9 billion TT in the Green Fund. Now this fund, it's used for remediation, it's used for education and so on as well. But the disbursements doesn't match the fund value. So for instance, at the end of 2019, the fund value was 6.9 billion, as I said, but in that particular year, there would have only been 13 million in disbursements throughout the life of the Green Fund. Now, again, it points to the need for different considerations, whether or not you find a system that can disburse the funds quicker, more robust, but with more robust monitoring as well, or do you change? There's been some discussion around, do you change the purpose of the fund to not only focus on civil society and community groups in terms of that remediation projects and education, but rather to pay for cleaner energy for those sort of projects and so on. So those are just some of the considerations in terms of the data. But the data insights really are supposed to promote dialogue. So based on the information that I provided, you can ask certain questions. how can a change in the tax regime or the royalty rates impact revenue? How can contracts be constantly revised to maximize value? Again, this is where contract transparency is important. In Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have contract transparency, full contract transparency, but the data tells a story. It highlights areas where, even though we don't have contract transparency, we can say, well, maybe we need to revise this contract to maximize the value that we earn. We look at the mining sector. Can digitization help increase the revenue from that sector? With just under $200 million owed, what can you do in terms of digitization, in terms of the use of technology to better quantify what you produce? Once you can quantify what you produce in a more coherent way, that intuitively leads to increased revenue because the royalty is linked to production, right? Do you have a single electronic window system for registering companies or for licensing companies to work in this sector? So those are some of the questions that the data from our reports can lead to drive. It drives dialogue, it drives debate. What are remediation, rehabilitation projects to prioritize from the Green Fund? Is it projects linked to coastal erosion? Is it projects in fence line communities that are close to where oil, gas, and petrochemical production occurs? What future policy should we focus on? I've highlighted areas in terms of what we earn for research and development. What future policy should we focus on? Should we spend this money to transition from oil and gas, to make Trinidad and Tobago a services hub for green energy? Should that be a future policy where we spend that money for education and research on? So again, the data forces you to ask several questions. And just in really closing, the data means different things to different stakeholders. So for government, and part of our focus is mainstreaming EITI data, where the data is available at the click of a mouse. And it's not just in EITI reports, but it's actually systematically disclosed. But the data, as I said, it means different things to different stakeholders. Just what it means to different stakeholders highlights the importance of having up-to-date data, having data that is readily and easily available. So in terms of the government side, data leads to innovation and policy making. If you have up-to-date data, you can design what policy you need to drive change in the country, because the data would inform that. For civil society, again, the data will provide you with a better basis to understand why government is taking this particular policy direction. For investors as well, data can help guide investment decisions. It can give you some insight into what a country's tax regime may mean for you as an investor. For the media, a very important pillar, the data can help you verify what is said in public spaces is actually the truth. For researchers and analysts, again, the data can help identify investment opportunities, whether that's in the oil and gas sector or the mining sector. I spoke about the single electronic window. I spoke about the need to better quantify mining sector production. Again, that research into that can be a business opportunity as well. So just in closing, I want to say that the EITI aligns with government policy and legislation. It sends a good signal to the partners in a country that, we as a country, we promote the high standards of governance and transparency. It also informs public dialogue and empowers civil society with data to ask the right questions and to hold both companies and government accountable. While we're talking about oil and gas revenue and so on, we have to acknowledge that, there's a changing landscape globally. There's green technology. It's cheaper. It's becoming cheaper by the minute. You're seeing the interest that people take in climate change. It highlights that, with the green technology and the focus on climate change, there's a reduced time to reap the oil and gas benefits. That's why paying attention to what we earn from the oil and gas sector is really important. And finally, due to the impact of COVID-19, all of our economies have been left reeling in a sense. And resilience is the key word. How do you build resilience? You build resilience, again, through the right policy. And you would need that data. You would need revenue from the extractive sector to help build your resilience, to help you rebuild your economies, as well as finance your future plans. So these are just a few of the takeaways I want to leave with you. And again, I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Long, for this informational, very much enlightening presentation. We have time maybe for one, maybe two questions if we take it really quickly. The one I have right in front of me is, are you getting a fair value as it relates to royalties?
What we've seen is that there's been an increase in value, but again, we have some data that points to fair value, but without contract transparency, without actually having the full details to the contracts, we can't say for 100%. We can say, yes, in some instances, we've seen an increase in royalty, but you can't speak to fair value in the fullest sense of the word without contract transparency.
Thank you so much. And the last question that we have time for today is, what has been one of the biggest lessons that you maybe want to pass on to the Guyanese people that you have learned from your experience in Trinidad and Tobago?
One very important lesson, I guess, is using your energy sector revenue for sustainable development. It may sound cliche. What are the policies that you want to focus on? Is it infrastructure building? Is it becoming a knowledge economy? So these are some of the things that Trinidad would have had some successes and some failures with in terms of overheating the economy, etc. But in terms of lessons, I would just say it's good to have dialogue about what do you want as a country? What do you buy into? To gain that buy-in from citizens, it's good to have dialogue. So if we can all agree that this is the direction that we're heading as Guyanese, as Trinis, etc., how do you get that buy-in with citizens? And always assess what you do, constantly assess what you do. So in constantly assessing what you do, you could say, okay, if my target was to have free or to increase tertiary education by 60% in 20 years or in 15 years, you always have to look at the targets that you set as a country and be realistic to say, okay, these are the gaps that we need to fill. And we may need to scrap this, we may need to do something differently. Because as I highlighted in the last slide, the world is changing. 20 years ago, Trinidad and Tobago used to be the #1 supplier of LNG to the US. Now with the advent of shale, we've diversified our portfolio in terms of the markets that we send our gas to, but it has impacted the country. Changes to technology, whether that's green technology, changes to public policy, whether that is the Paris Climate Change Accords. These things have an impact on your policy. So always constantly getting buy-in from your citizenry, as well as constantly revising your targets and addressing gaps. That to me would be the best takeaway in terms of advice I would give to Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Long. Now we reached the end of the time that we had for today. So I just want to say how grateful I am for this enlightening presentation and bring in some of the lessons from Trinidad and Tobago, and for Mr. Sherwin Long to give all this information and wealth of knowledge and experience to us today. And the next thing today is to take a look at what else we have in store for you, dear participants. We have one more panel conversation coming up at 5 o'clock Guyanese time. It is about conflict. completing interest in the extractive sector, how to reduce risk and conflict and reap benefits. And don't forget, we have day 2 coming up tomorrow. We are starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you are wondering about links, the link that you register, upon registration, the link that you received will get you into all of the sessions happening tomorrow. So make sure that you save that link in your inbox somewhere where you can easily access. It is your ticket for all of the open sessions happening tomorrow and on Friday. Now, if you have any questions for us, you can always reach us and check out our website. I have it right on the screen. I'm sharing this with you. Hopefully we get to see you later today at the last panel starting at 5 o'clock and at the informal cocktail hour starting at 6:30. With that, thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you so much for Mr. Sherwin Long for enlightening us on all of the great work and incredible progress they have made in Trinidad and Tobago.
Kitty, one last thing. I also left my email address in the chat. So if there were questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, please send me an email.
Will do, and we will make that available to the participants. So speaking of the chat, before I close out this virtual webinar room for today, take a look at 2 links I've put there for you. One is, if you'd like to, we would very much like to hear your feedback about today's presentation. You can click on that. And the other one is the cocktail hour. Grab that link for yourself. And lastly, there is a Guyana extractive sector transparency survey, which is running all week long. You can go ahead and add your perspective, your perceptions, and check on it daily, because as we have more and more participants completing the survey, the results are available real time. So you can see how more and more voices added to this discussion will change the layout of the results and where the public opinion stands at this moment in time. So all of them are in the chat. I'm going to give you a few more minutes to grab these important links before we close out today's this particular part of the conference. And we will see you everyone at 5 p.m. with the next panel discussion we have on the agenda. Bye-bye.